With the seizure of two more Venezuela-linked oil tankers by the United States, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt and other cabinet members are currently addressing the press. The U.S. seized a Russian-flagged oil tanker that was being shadowed by a Russian submarine on today after more than 2-week-long pursuit across the Atlantic as a part of a U.S. blockade of Venezuelan oil exports, two U.S. officials have told. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth have now addressed the two seized oil tankers. The vessel was previously known as the Bella 1 and tried to evade a U.S. blockade near Venezuela before heading north across the Atlantic. The tanker was being tracked under suspicion of transporting sanctioned linked oil and was intercepted after changing its name and flag to Russia's in an apparent bid to avoid any capture. This appeared to be the first time in recent memory that the U.S. military has seized a Russian-flagged vessel. The operation took place after the tanker, originally known as the Bella 1, slipped through U.S. submarine blockade of sanctioned oil tankers in the Caribbean and rebuffed U.S. Coast Guard efforts to board it. Russian President Vladimir Putin sends Navy escort as U.S. plans to seize banned Venezuelan oil tanker. The operation involving U.S. Coast Guard and military forces is being carried out near Iceland, with Russian military vessels, including a submarine, reportedly nearby. The tanker Marinera, which was originally called Bella 1, had earlier evaded U.S. efforts to board it. This move could escalate tensions between the U.S. and Russia, marking the first such attempt in recent memory. The U.S. Southern Command confirms the U.S. Coast Guard has apprehended the MT Sophia in international waters. The tanker is now being escorted to the U.S. for final deposition. This marks a significant move in ongoing maritime operations. Now for this discussion, we welcome Professor Andrew Latham. He's an international affairs expert, joined us live from Minneapolis. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us once again. Good to see you. Now that we know that, U.S. has seized a Russian-flagged oil tanker, how do you think this will escalate to, or do you think that there is some kind of understanding between Russia and U.S. about this particular oil tanker?
Well, it partly hinges on the facts of the case. It seems that this ship is sailing under a false flag. It's not a Russian ship. It's a Venezuelan ship that changed its flag, painted a Russian flag on the hull, did all kinds of other things, which under customary and contemporary international law is illegal. And countries are allowed to board ships in those circumstances and inspect them. And if they're found to be in violation of the domestic law of the ship that's launched the boarding, they can be taken they can be captured, basically. It remains, I guess, in a court of law, one might have to ask, was this ship actually under a false flag, or is it really a Russian ship? The Russians, it needs to be said, are operating a shadow or a ghost fleet in order to avoid sanctions themselves, carrying Russian crude to various parts of the world, but also lending a helping hand, as it were, to fellow travelers like the Venezuelans and the Iranians, who also need their sanctioned oil to be transported around the globe. So it's partly from a legal perspective about the facts of the case, not about the law, but from a geopolitical perspective, obviously the tensions are ratcheted up between the U.S. and Russia. The fact that the Russians have deployed submarines now to escort some of these ships creates the possibility for a relatively straightforward boarding escalating into something that nobody really wants.
Right. And so why would, if it wasn't of Russia, where was this heading, these ships, where was this headed? Do we know about that?
I'm not sure we know exactly which direction they were headed at this point. I haven't seen that. That typically it would be between Russia and Russian markets, or between Venezuela and Venezuelan markets. or between Russia and Venezuela in this case, just moving the ship back and forth. But it remains to be revealed, I think, as to exactly where this ship was headed. And in terms of international law, that's not terribly relevant. The fact of the matter is, flying under a false flag is illegal, and the United States was well within its legal right, despite what Moscow was saying, to board the ship and inspect it.
Right, and thank you for sharing that. And how do you think, how will this jeopardize or how will this affect the Venezuela's government? You know, just yesterday or day before, the Venezuelan government, just the Rodriguez, she took oath to be the leader of the country. How do you think this will be affecting her government?
Well, I might interpret this as a very clear signal to the Rodriguez government that Venezuela had better do largely what the United States wants it to do, or the United States will double down on its quarantine/blockade of Venezuela, and its sanctions will increase. Right now, President Trump is holding out a carrot and a stick. The carrot is, if you go along with what I want, all of these sanctions against your oil, and wonderful. And if you don't, well, this is a foretaste of what could happen. The United States will double down on its efforts to prevent the Russian ghost fleet from carrying Venezuelan crude, or Venezuelan ships from carrying crude, and that will have really a negative effect on an already teetering Venezuelan economy.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. And Professor, now, you know, if this operation, how do you think this will be reshaping the entire globe's shadow fleet operations?
Well, the Russians are powerfully motivated to keep this moving. They cannot fund their war without selling oil on the international market, and there are only so many land routes, mostly to China, for example. So they have an incentive to do everything under the sun to make sure that that shadow fleet, that ghost fleet, continues to operate and continues to transport Russian oil to markets around the world. And there they have a shared interest with the Venezuelans and the Iranians. They all want to circumvent American-led and international sanctions and do what they want to do. I don't think the United States has been doing this kind of interception anyway. This is not unprecedented. But at this particular moment, I think the signals are being beamed mostly in the direction of Caracas in Venezuela and less in the direction of Moscow.
Right. Do you think any other country will be eyeing this situation closely?
I think Iran is very attentive to this because they are also under enormous sanctions from the U.S. and the international community. They're also very dependent on oil. They're also looking for ways to circumvent those sanctions. And any additional brick that is put in that sanctions wall is something that they don't welcome. So not surprisingly, the rhetoric coming out of Tehran is very much, this is a violation of international law, which is both incorrect and ironic given the way that state conducts itself.
Yes. So what legal and geopolitical questions arise from enforcing the sanctions through maritime interdictions in international waters now?
Well, it raises questions about the overall so-called rules-based international order. Is it any longer fit for purpose? It was built in the aftermath of the Second World War by the victors of the Second World War, and it was globalized after the Soviet Union went away. Everybody kind of bought into it, including the People's Republic of China, which joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. But the point is, it was a product of a particular time in world history and a particular set of circumstances. And that was a long time ago, and the circumstances have changed dramatically. Do we need new rules? Given technology, given the changing geopolitical nature of world order, it's no longer unipolar or bipolar, it's now a multipolar world in which there are many great powers, including India and China, and regional great powers like Turkey. Maybe this is a symptom of a deeper malaise that rules-based international order is nearing the end of its life cycle, and some new sets of arrangements, rules, norms, institutions will need to be built. as they were in 1945, as they were after the Napoleonic Wars in a very different context. Every century or so, it seems, there needs to be a rethink of those rules, norms, and institutions. And this kind of signals to me that we may be in the early stages of that transitional moment when the old world order is dying, the new world order has yet to be born, and we're in that interregnum in which strong players will do what they will, and weak players will suffer what they must.
I completely agree with you. You know, building on that old world order, and now us being in, let's just say, the transitional period. So who will be taking lead in the upcoming or the new world order? What do you think?
Well, my sense is the United States is not going to step off the stage easily. It shouldn't. It's still a very powerful player, militarily, economically, culturally. The Russians are a kind of diminished great power, but the war in Ukraine has demonstrated that they can still have an impact, as does their operation of the Shadow Fleet. The People's Republic of China, obviously a player on the global stage, from Latin America to South Asia to Europe, it's a big player. And then there are others, contenders, the largest by population country on the planet, India, which is not a permanent member of the Security Council, and therefore does not have a veto. That seems out of line with the distribution of power on the world stage today. So India will be a player. There are powerful regional players. Turkey is one, for example. We can look at Brazil, perhaps, and others. If the European Union ever really got its act together, it might too be a powerful player that could help shape this. And then the question will be, okay, so that's the new distribution of power. It's not just the US and the USSR. It's not just the US. It's now all of these countries coming together. What kind of order will they hash out? What values will be represented and institutionalized? What virtues, what norms, what historical legal traditions, what interests, all of those, how will they get baked into that particular pie in ways that satisfies most of the major and most important players and actually facilitates in a more or less peaceful way the interaction of these big players on the world stage. That's a lot to ask, it's a heavy lift, but the planet has done it before in very different circumstances again, after two world wars in 1945, after the Napoleonic Wars in 1815, after the 30 Years' War in Europe in 1648, Treaty of Westphalia. And one could find other examples in China and South Asia as well, where large empires fall, that world order collapses, and a new one emerges in its place with new rules and new norms and new institutions. So it's going to be a bumpy ride, it always is, and the outcome remains to be seen.
Yes, very interesting. We will be eyeing that. Thank you very much, Professor Latham, for sharing that. I would like to also welcome another guest, retired Major General Sudhakarji. He's a senior strategic and international affairs expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Major General, for joining us once again. Good to see you. Now, looking at what the press conference, and the U.S. U.S. seizing Venezuela-linked, allegedly Russian oil tanker or Shadow Fleet. What message is this seizure sending to other countries, and also what do you think that which country will be eyeing this scenario closely?
Well, good evening, Asoma. Thank you for getting me for your show, and it's turning out to be a very, very hostile and I would say may escalate in future. The country which will be eyeing obviously will be US, Venezuela and Russia, but at the moment I think Russia would be focusing entirely on this particular activity because the escorts, naval escorts have been sent, and under the naval escorts the tanker is sailing across. And this is a very dangerous situation. It may turn out to be extremely volatile if it is not handled with maturity and diplomacy and dialogue. Back to you, Asuma.
Thank you very much, Major General, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we have another development come in. U.S. State of Secretary Marco Rubio, in a recent meeting with the press, has said that the meeting that he will be meeting with Denmark's government next week to discuss on the issue of Greenland. When asked about the possibility of military intervention in Greenland, Rubio has declined to comment on it and stressed that it all depends on how the talks will proceed next week. Rubio has also noted that President Trump has not been the first U.S. president to talk about the acquisition of Greenland. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Major General Sudhakarji. He's a senior strategic and international affairs expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Major General, for staying with us. Now, looking at this, it seems like, yes, U.S. is pursuing their interest in rather hastily looking at this. How do you see the situation with Greenland, about Greenland, from U.S.'s perspective?
It's a blatant violation of international rules-based international order, and this is a very poor example of how to violate the accepted or established agreements and settled principles of operations amongst the NATO nations. Greenland is an autonomous country, part of Denmark, and Denmark is part of NATO. US is also a founding father, it's part of NATO. So such a thing happening, it actually adds on to the turbulence in the world order. It gives a very negative signal. Well, USA may have any number of justification to do, citing examples of Chinese and Russian vessels thronging along the coastline of Greenland, but the fact of the matter is that in 21st century, here is a man who is the president of USA, who assured people and gave them, I would say, very credible justification and also commitment that his effort would be oriented towards stopping the mindless conflict going on in Central Europe and Middle East. Now, instead, he's gone on to attack Iran. Now, the second attack against Iran is being prepared. Now, here is a story of Venezuela, which I think it was neither law enforcement nor any other thing, but only a military attack under a brand of drug cartels. Venezuela does not figure in the UN document. So under these kind of multiple ambiguous kind of facades, they carry on these kind of activities, and they hijack a president or ruling president and take him to their own country. USA is 4,500 kilometers away, and Greenland is much more than that. So under the circumstances, these kind of stances which USA is presenting or projecting are extremely dangerous for the world order. It may actually give a clear indication to other countries in the world. If a situation like this is evolving, well, the dominant power in that region may not hesitate to carry out similar action in the adjoining or the neighborhood or the countries contiguous to its border. A classic example is India and Bangladesh. The way things are unfolding, it may prompt India to use this particular case as a precedent to go in for some activity, some kinetic action, or some action against Bangladesh. So that will not require any kind of justification. And same would be the case with China against Taiwan. Is that accepted by one and all in the world order? I don't think so. Therefore, it is a very, very detrimental kind of a step which is being taken by USA. And like the Prime Minister of Denmark, he articulated by saying that diplomacy and dialogue is a better form of answer. If they want to dominate Greenland,
Yes.
the NATO forces, they have been saying that why not NATO as a whole, they carry out a domination of Greenland together so as to deter forces inimical like Russia and China to
Yes.
its security and safety. So these are my fleeting thoughts coming to my mind. Back to you, Soma.
Thank you very much, Major General, for sharing that insight. I would like to also welcome Dr. Gilbert Doctorow. He's a Russian affairs expert, joins us live from Brussels to our discussion. Dr. Doctorow, thank you very much for joining us once again. Now, looking at all the development that has come in from U.S. today, in particular, to the U.S. seizing Venezuela's alleged oil tanker, which was headed maybe to Russia. We don't exactly know where was it headed, but we know that it did have a Russian flag on the front. And also the claims made by U.S. towards Greenland. What's your analysis on this situation?
The situation is the United States is disrupting anything that remained of normal relations between states. And this is, in the case of Russia, they are presenting, by the capture of this tanker, they are presenting an unprecedented provocation, which I can only interpret as a desperate effort to get Russia into a war. It may sound insane, but the provocation after provocation directed against Russia in the last few weeks only points in that direction. That Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, said in the last week, "We're coming for you, Putin." That was not a statement made idly. A week ago, 90 drones, armed drones, were sent against the residence of President Putin, which was documented in materials that were given by to the United States military officers at the embassy in Moscow. These were the routing of one of the downed drones, showed that it had been programmed precisely to strike the residence, and it was pretty clear that it had been programmed by the United States. So these are unimaginable provocations against Moscow, trying to get them to do something drastic that would then justify an American strike, shall we call it a preemptive nuclear strike on Russia. This is where we stand now. As for India, I agree with what your previous panelist has said, but I want to put an additional dimension here. India is one of the founding members of BRICS, and everything the United States is doing, particularly by the last weekend's attack on Caracas and kidnapping of the head of state, that is directed against BRICS, just as the 50% tariffs on Brazil over the imprisonment of Bolsonaro are directed against the founding member of BRICS. BRICS is the leading institution heading the world into a multipolar governance. It is directly attacked by Trump for that very reason. So India is not just a bystander watching these events that are now most acutely directed against Venezuela, and through Venezuela against Venezuela's major customer for oil, China. It is not just watching idly what the provocations directed against Mr. Putin. India is also on the line, insofar as India has invested diplomatic efforts, political efforts to raise BRICS, and BRICS is now under a life or death attack by Mr. Trump.
That's very enlightening. Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Doctorow. Please stay with us as we take another breaking development from this news. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump has slammed his NATO allies